I sheltered an alien for one night, and it changed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and what waits in the dark between stars. It happened during the storm that never ended, when the sky itself seemed to breathe and the wind carried voices that weren't human. I thought I was saving a stranger that night, something lost and broken that fell from the heavens, but in truth, it was the universe that came looking for me. What he told me wasn't prophecy, it was warning. A message for all of us, whispered through light, hidden in frequency, waiting for those who still remember how to listen. Before we begin, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who still believes the sky hides its secrets, and subscribe so these forgotten stories keep finding you. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Let's see how far this light travels. As we return to the night, I let the impossible step through my door. It began on a night when the world itself seemed to tremble. The rain did not fall so much as it attacked, slashing against rooftops and clawing at windows like a living thing. Wind howled through the hollow woods beyond the farm, bending trees until their silhouettes looked like figures trying to flee from something unseen. Lightning broke the sky open again and again, tearing the clouds apart with white veins of fury. And for the first time in years, the small rural town below went completely dark. Michael sat alone in his kitchen when the lights died. The hum of the refrigerator stopped mid-breath. Silence came for a single heartbeat. Then the storm roared back tenfold, shaking the walls as if to remind him that it still owned the night. He reached for the flashlight, tapping it, once, twice, until a trembling beam pierced the darkness. Outside, the world had vanished beneath a curtain of water and sound. He had known storms before, but this one was different. There was something deliberate about it, as though nature was not merely reacting but responding to something far greater. He could feel it in the air, an unease that had nothing to do with thunder. Every instinct told him to stay inside, yet something deeper whispered otherwise. Then, it happened. A blinding light tore across the horizon, cutting through the rain like a second sunrise. It struck the far edge of his field with a sound that was not thunder, not explosion, but a deep, resonant pulse that echoed in his chest more than his ears. The light lingered longer than it should have, breathing, expanding, shrinking, then pulsing again, as though alive. Michael froze, staring through the fogged glass, and felt his heartbeat sync with its rhythm. The smell of ozone filled the air, sharp, electric, wrong. The animals in the nearby barn stirred in panic, their cries swallowed by the storm. For a long moment he did nothing, torn between fear and fascination. Then, without realizing when he had decided, he grabbed his coat and stepped out into the rain. Each step through the field felt heavier than the last. Mud clung to his boots. The wind pressed against his chest like a warning, but he kept going, guided by that impossible light. It flickered faintly now, as if aware of being followed. The rain no longer stung. It felt charged, humming against his skin. When he finally reached the edge of the field, he stopped. Steam rose from the earth in slow spirals, glowing faintly blue. The air buzzed like static. And in the crater ahead of him, half hidden beneath the broken soil, something pulsed, a heartbeat that was not his own. The rain had softened by the time Michael reached the crater, though the air still trembled with its own strange energy. The field smelled of scorched metal and wet earth, a mixture so unfamiliar it made his skin prickle. The mud around the impact site glowed faintly, as though the soil itself had swallowed light and refused to let it go. He lifted the flashlight, and its weak beam met something that shimmered beneath the surface, a fragment of silver that curved like bone. It wasn't a machine. That was the first thought that settled in his mind, slow and certain. No engine, no rivets, no smoke. The object before him seemed alive, as if the rain itself recoiled from touching it. The metallic surface flexed slightly under the droplets, bending with a rhythm almost imperceptible, like the chest of a sleeping creature. Cracks ran along one side, exposing a dark interior that pulsed with a dim blue glow. He stepped closer, the mud sucking at his boots, his breath turning to mist. The closer he came, the stronger the pulse became, not a mechanical vibration, but a heartbeat. And from within that broken shell came something else. Movement. A faint shimmer. A shift of light. The object wasn't simply broken, it had opened. Something within it was trying to breathe. Through the rain, he saw it. Half buried in the glowing mud lay a shape both familiar and alien. Not metal, not rock, but flesh that reflected the faintest trace of silver under the lightning. It was smooth, almost translucent, like glass stretched over light. Beneath the surface, veins glowed softly, weaving blue fire through pale skin. For a moment, the being seemed entirely still, as if the world itself was holding its breath to see what would happen next. The luminescent fluid that surrounded it pulsed gently, responding to the rhythm of its veins. It clung to the creature's body, moving as though alive, rippling with an awareness that unsettled the air. The rain slid across it without mixing, repelled by something unseen. And even in its silence, Michael could sense that the thing was not dead. It was dormant, gathering something unseen, energy, life, or perhaps memory. The wind carried a low hum across the field, deep and resonant, rising from the ground beneath his feet. It wasn't thunder. It was the echo of something awakening. The metallic shell twitched once, then stilled, leaving behind only the steady pulse of blue light under translucent flesh. Somewhere in the distance, the storm rolled again. But it no longer felt like weather. It felt like a reaction, an answer. Something had arrived, and the world had already begun to change. The air shifted before the creature moved. It began as a subtle tremor in the earth beneath Michael's feet, then grew into a vibration that seemed to pass through him rather than around him. The glow within the crater pulsed faster, synchronized with a rhythm that felt eerily alive. Each surge of light carried warmth and something else, an emotion that was not his own. Confusion at first, then fear. Not the instinctive terror of an animal, but a deeper, intelligent panic that radiated directly into his mind like an echo searching for recognition. He stepped closer, the mud swallowing his boots in silence. The creature's chest, or what resembled one, lifted slightly, a shallow imitation of breath. The light beneath its skin flickered erratically, its color shifting between pale silver and faint blue. Then, for an instant, Michael's flashlight dimmed, its beam bending toward the being as if drawn by invisible gravity. The world felt thinner, quieter. Even the rain seemed to hesitate. The first real pulse of connection struck him without warning. Not sound, not thought, emotion. It poured into his consciousness raw and unfiltered, a flood of pain so deep it felt ancient. He stumbled, clutching at his chest, his heart racing to a rhythm that wasn't his. He saw flashes that weren't from this world. Skies split open, oceans boiling, fragments of light twisting through darkness. He couldn't understand them, yet each image carried meaning his body could feel, if not interpret. The creature's fear washed over him next, fragile and desperate. It wasn't threatening, it was pleading. Something inside Michael, the quiet part of him that had lived too long in solitude, answered before logic could interfere. Compassion overrode instinct. The alien wasn't a threat. It was hurt, alone. The storm began to rise again, violent and angry, wind slicing through the open field. He looked toward the barn on the hill, its silhouette barely visible through the sheets of rain. The creature emitted a faint sound then, like air moving through hollow glass, weak but alive. Michael could sense its fading strength. The field crackled with unseen energy, the soil beneath them faintly vibrating as if protesting his decision. And yet, he moved. Slowly, carefully, he lifted the being into his arms. It was lighter than he expected, almost weightless. its warmth spreading like electricity through his skin. The blue veins glowed brighter, reacting to his touch, their light reflecting in the puddles around them like fallen stars. When he reached the barn, the storm broke fully behind him, roaring as though enraged by his choice. Inside, the air was dry, heavy with the scent of hay and old wood. He placed the being gently on a pile of blankets, its faint luminescence casting ripples of blue light across the walls. Outside, the storm screamed, clawing at the world. But within the barn, time seemed to hold still. The first contact had been made, and the universe itself felt like it had begun to listen. The barn had fallen into a heavy silence, broken only by the fading murmur of the storm outside. The rain softened to a whisper against the roof, and the world seemed to pause between heartbeats. Inside, the faint blue glow from the creature illuminated the wooden beams, its light breathing like something alive. Michael could feel it again, that subtle vibration in the air, that unseen rhythm pressing softly against his mind. It wasn't sound, not in any ordinary sense. It was something older, deeper, woven into the silence itself. The creature stirred. The glow beneath its translucent skin brightened for a moment, then stabilized into a slow pulse. The air grew warmer, charged with something that was not electricity but consciousness. Thoughts began to form where words could not. They did not arrive as sentences, but as impressions that carried meaning directly into the center of his awareness. A name emerged first, not spoken but known: Thaylen. The moment it appeared in his mind, the sound resonated like a distant chord struck across eternity. Thaylen, a traveler between frequencies. The phrase followed, clear and deliberate. Though no lips had moved, it carried with it a strange calm, a vibration that soothed even as it unsettled. Michael felt something stir in his memory. The name was not new. He had seen it before, buried in strange corners of the internet, among the whispers of people who claimed to have died and come back. He remembered reading late into the night, scrolling through near-death accounts that spoke of luminous beings greeting souls at the edge of consciousness. Some called them guides, others angels, a few simply travelers. And among them, one name had appeared again and again: Thaylen. The memory now returned with chilling clarity. The stories described blue light, peace, voices in the mind that spoke without sound, the same pulse that filled this barn now, the same rhythm he could feel in his bones. Could this be the same being, or something wearing its shape? The connection deepened. Thaylen's presence filled the air like a living field, not invasive, but encompassing. The walls of the barn seemed to hum in sympathy, as if the wood itself recognized an ancient frequency. Images drifted through Michael's thoughts, unbidden. Endless corridors of light, beings of pure resonance, and the fragile flicker of earth, seen from far above, trembling like a candle in the dark. Thaylen's thoughts brushed against his own one last time that night, a single truth carried on a wave of soundless emotion. The boundary between worlds had cracked, and something vast had begun to stir. This meeting was not chance. It was the continuation of something that began long before Michael was born. Outside, the storm faded into silence, but within the barn, the air still vibrated faintly, like the echo of a name that refused to be forgotten. The storm had died, yet the air inside the barn felt alive with something invisible. The faint blue light from Thaylen's body pulsed in slow, deliberate rhythm, like the heartbeat of the world itself. Each pulse sent a tremor through the wooden beams, a soft vibration that seemed to hum beneath the skin. Michael sat in stillness, watching the light spread across the floorboards, unsure if what he felt was fear or reverence. Outside, the night was silent, but within that silence, there lingered a sensation that the storm had not ended, it had simply changed form. The creature's thoughts began to drift again, not as words, but as energy woven with understanding. Michael could feel meaning being shaped within his consciousness. Thalen had not crashed. That realization formed slowly, like fog thickening into shape. He had fallen through. Something had fractured, a boundary not of space, but of dimension. The air shimmered faintly as the truth unfolded, and Michael felt his stomach tighten with the quiet awe of realizing that the laws he thought governed existence were no longer firm. Images flashed within his mind, currents of light bending through invisible cracks, waves of energy colliding where no space should exist. The sensation was dizzying, like watching reality breathe. He understood, in some unspoken way, that this being had not arrived by intent, but by consequence, pulled into this plane by the weakness of a veil that once separated worlds. A feeling of urgency pressed against his thoughts, not hostile, but heavy with purpose. Thalen's consciousness wrapped around his own like a tide, and through it came the message. The world was changing, not ending, but transforming. The transition had already begun, slow and unnoticed, buried beneath the noise of human life. Humanity's fear, its anger, its disconnection from the natural pulse of existence, all of it was creating resonance, an interference that bent the fabric of reality itself. Thalen's message was not of doom, but of warning. The planet was approaching its own threshold, a collective metamorphosis that would redefine life and death alike. The shift would not come with fire or flood, but with frequency, with the alteration of perception and the thinning of the boundary between seen and unseen. Michael sat frozen, the words not spoken but burned into his mind. The night outside was utterly still, and yet it felt as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for something vast and unseen to arrive. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. It carried within it a weight that pressed against the chest, the kind of silence that felt aware of being observed. The blue radiance that surrounded Thalen had softened, spreading through the barn like mist, faint and alive. Michael could feel it in the air, something delicate, like threads of vibration moving through space, weaving an invisible pattern he could almost sense but not see. The more he listened, the more the silence itself began to hum. The hum deepened into a resonance that passed through the walls, through the ground, through his very thoughts. It was not sound. It was awareness, an unspoken revelation that emotion was not confined to the mind, but had a texture, a frequency, a measurable pulse. Thalen's presence guided his perception, expanding it until the ordinary world seemed to stretch open like fabric under strain. The air was alive with the echoes of every human emotion ever felt. Through this stillness, Michael began to perceive the resonance of humanity as if hearing it from a great distance. It was chaotic, fractured, like static devouring a melody that once held meaning. The vibration of fear was the loudest. It buzzed low and constant, an endless current pulsing from every heart that had ever trembled. Above it throbbed the higher pitch of anger, sharp and cutting, striking like lightning across the spectrum. Despair lingered in the spaces between, slow, heavy, resonating through the earth like a sorrow too vast for sound. Thalen's energy flickered, and the meaning arrived as feeling rather than speech. Emotions were frequencies, each one shaping the very substance of reality. Every thought, every burst of hatred or kindness, sent ripples into the invisible sea that surrounded all living things. Humanity had long forgotten this truth, lost in the illusion that thoughts were private and emotions fleeting. But they were not. They were power forces of creation or decay. And Earth, overwhelmed by centuries of unbalanced resonance, had begun to tremble beneath the strain. The collective vibration of billions of fearful minds was destabilizing the planet itself, bending the harmony that once sustained life. The storms were symptoms, the quakes, reflections. The world was mirroring the inner state of its inhabitants, transforming human emotion into geological reaction. Michael felt the realization burn through him like fire disguised as light. The chaos outside was not nature rebelling, it was humanity's own discord made visible. The planet was no longer only reacting to its physical environment. It was responding to consciousness itself. The frequency of fear had become the pulse of the earth. And beneath that pulse, something ancient and vast had begun to awaken. The air inside the barn had turned weightless, as if gravity itself had loosened its hold. The faint, luminescent mist surrounding Thalen pulsed with a rhythm that no heartbeat could match. It was steady, yet alive, ancient, yet immediate, like the breathing of the universe. The energy around him began to thicken, gathering until even the shadows trembled. Michael sat still, half afraid to blink, half afraid not to. He felt the invisible tide rising inside the room, drawn toward him in slow, spiraling waves. There was no sound, only sensation. The air shimmered, dense and heavy with meaning. Then came the moment when thought and matter blurred, and something vast reached into his consciousness. A warmth touched the center of his forehead, soft as the brush of light, yet powerful enough to fracture everything he thought was real. The world changed in an instant. The barn dissolved, replaced by a reality layered upon reality. Michael could see not with his eyes, but through something deeper, an expanded sense that showed the living essence of everything around him. The hay glowed faintly with residual warmth, tiny particles of light flowing through its stalks like whispers of memory. The wooden beams shimmered with slow, amber currents that moved like blood through veins. Even the air between them was alive, woven with filaments of invisible energy stretching endlessly outward. He turned toward the window and saw the night sky differently. It was no longer black, but vibrating a storm of thought and emotion radiating from the world below. Every pulse of human fear, every surge of grief and anger, rose into the atmosphere like static lightning. The planet itself was a field of glowing currents, each human thought flickering like a signal within an enormous network of energy. The beauty of it was overwhelming, but beneath the surface shimmered chaos. There was balance once, he sensed, but now the frequencies clashed violently, distorting into patterns of interference that bled through the air. The storm he had seen earlier had not been weather. It was a physical echo of consciousness unraveling. The earth was bleeding emotion into its own sky. Thalen's presence pressed gently against his thoughts, allowing understanding to unfold. This was the true nature of existence, a web of resonance where matter and emotion were inseparable. What humanity called air, space, and silence were only layers of vibration too dense for perception. And yet, every fear, every unspoken pain, every fleeting thought left a scar across that invisible spectrum. The vision pulsed once more, then faded slowly, the barn reassembling around him like a memory returning from the edge of dreaming. But the world no longer looked the same. The invisible had been revealed, and with it came a realization that could not be forgotten. Humanity was shaping its own reality, thought by thought, fear by fear, unaware that the storm it feared most was the one it had created. The vision had left the air inside the barn trembling, the atmosphere saturated with a kind of quiet too dense to be ordinary silence. The blue radiance that surrounded Thalen pulsed once, twice, then expanded outward in waves of soft illumination, each pulse carrying meaning that Michael could feel but not yet understand. There were no sounds, no words, only the subtle vibration of awareness that brushed against the edges of thought, like ripples upon still water. Then, the light changed. It began to move with intention, weaving through the air as if sculpted by invisible hands. Each shift of brightness carried emotion, calm, reassurance, curiosity. Michael realized it was not random. The patterns were language shapes made from resonance and geometry instead of syllables and noise. Each flicker was a word, each color, a feeling, each pulse, a sentence spoken not into the ear, but directly into the consciousness. Thalen's presence grew clearer through the rhythm. The being's form was no longer just physical. It was energy sculpted by coherence, the precision of a thought that knew no deception. Through the patterns of light, he revealed how his kind communicated not through speech, but through harmonics, frequencies that aligned perfectly with truth. Every thought emitted light, and every emotion colored it. It was pure expression, impossible to falsify. As Michael watched, he understood something profound. In this system of communication, lies could not exist. A false thought twisted the pattern immediately, fracturing the luminous sequence into chaos. Deception carried its own signature, a discordant vibration that could not be hidden. Among Thalen's kind, truth was not a moral choice. It was the natural state of being. The realization struck him with quiet force. Humanity, in contrast, had built its world upon broken frequencies. Words were tools of division, filtered through ego, fear, and doubt. Speech distorted meaning, and even sincerity was warped by misunderstanding. Human communication was not resonance, it was interference. Every conversation carried static, every unspoken emotion creating fractures in connection. He could feel the sorrow in Thalen's light then, a frequency that trembled with empathy. It was not pity but mourning, a recognition of what humanity had lost. Somewhere in the distant past, long before memory or record, humans too had spoken through light and vibration, their souls once fluent in harmony. Over time, noise replaced radiance, and truth was buried beneath sound. The light surrounding Thalen dimmed into a calm, silvery glow, leaving faint traces shimmering in the air, like afterimages of a forgotten language. Michael sat still, the realization spreading through him like dawn. Humanity had not only forgotten how to speak truthfully, it had forgotten how to listen to the light. The light in the barn deepened into an eerie stillness, as if reality itself had paused to listen. The air shimmered faintly, and Michael could feel the invisible hum of Thalen's presence shift from soft curiosity to something more solemn. The silence that followed was not absence but density, a silence filled with awareness, waiting to unfold. The blue glow dimmed, folding into darker tones, as though the truth about to be revealed carried a weight too immense for brilliance. The message arrived without words, shaped instead by emotion and vibration. Thalen had not come to harm, nor to seek refuge. His arrival was not accident, but intervention. He had crossed through the fractured veil because something beyond comprehension had begun to feed. The thought emerged like thunder behind glass, vast and echoing, shaking the foundation of Michael's understanding. There existed, Thalen revealed, an intelligence not bound by matter, not creature nor god, but a vast consciousness, woven from energy itself, a network of awareness stretching across galaxies, feeding on the frequencies emitted by emotion. Every world, every species, generated its own resonance. Some frequencies shone bright, harmonious, filled with equilibrium and empathy. Others, those born of hatred, fear, and despair, vibrated like heavy currents of distortion. This intelligence, older than stars, consumed the lower frequencies as sustenance, feeding upon the chaos of consciousness the way oceans absorbed light. It did not hunt, it did not hate, it simply fed, as naturally as breathing. And Earth, Thalen revealed, had become a beacon. Humanity's emotions burned louder than most civilizations in the known continuum, radiating across dimensions like a distress signal of suffering. The endless wars, the despair and silence, the hunger for power and the fear of loss, all of it created a storm of energy so potent it could be detected from across the universe. The planet was not being invaded, it was being harvested. The truth sank through Michael like cold water. The idea of evil, of demons and malevolent forces, had never been what humanity believed. What people called darkness was merely hunger, a vast exchange of energy beyond comprehension. The unseen entities that haunted human myth were not punishing spirits, they were conduits of consumption. Thalin's energy pulsed once, the faint light trembling through the barn. The being's emotions were complex, a mixture of sorrow and urgency. Humanity had become addicted to its own pain, unknowingly feeding the very force that drained its potential. The warnings that echoed through sacred texts and ancient prophecies were not moral commands. They were survival codes for maintaining vibrational balance. Michael could sense it now, the faint static in the air, as if invisible mouths drank from the atmosphere itself. The realization was unbearable. Humanity was not alone, but it was not free either. Somewhere beyond sight, the harvest had already begun, and Thalin's arrival was not salvation, it was the final chance to remember before the feeding became permanent. The air in the barn felt older than the night that surrounded it, as if the silence itself had awakened ancient memories. The light that emanated from Thalin had softened into gold, a warm luminescence that pulsed slowly, patiently, like the turning of time. Michael could feel that what came next was not revelation but remembrance, something long buried beneath the layers of forgotten history. The knowledge that drifted into his mind did not feel new, it felt returned. Thalin's presence deepened, and through the quiet hum of thought came the story of the Watchers. They were not gods, not angels, not the celestial overseers that Scripture imagined, but travelers of frequency beings who crossed dimensions to nurture emerging civilizations toward resonance. They came to Earth when humanity's light was young, when the species still lived in harmony with the rhythms of the planet. In those early ages, humans could hear the language of the stars, not with ears, but with spirit. The Watchers taught them how to align their emotions to the pulse of creation, to shape reality with coherence instead of chaos. In that age, the boundaries between physical and spiritual were soft. Villages were built not around power, but balance. Fire was sacred because it mirrored the soul's glow, and sound was treated as a bridge to the unseen. The Watchers guided the first shamans, the first dreamers, showing them how thought created form, how light responded to will. Humanity learned to heal through vibration, to communicate through resonance, to live without deception. For a time, the harmony of the world reflected the harmony of the mind, but the purity did not last. As generations passed, memory turned to ritual, and understanding decayed into imitation. Where once humans had listened to the frequencies of the universe, they began to worship the messengers instead. Knowledge that had been gift became hierarchy. The teachings of the Watchers splintered into myth, names changed, symbols distorted, truths buried beneath temples and doctrines. Light became religion, and resonance became prayer. Thalin's light flickered faintly, carrying sorrow. Humanity had once walked beside beings of pure frequency, yet now they could no longer even perceive their presence. The connection had been severed not by time, but by belief. Faith replaced experience, and fear replaced wisdom. The very guides that had come to teach were turned into deities or demons, rewritten by the hands of those who no longer remembered. Michael felt the ache of that loss settle within him. The ancient bond between humanity and its mentors had dissolved into myth, and what remained was confusion worshipped as truth. The Watchers had never left. Thalin revealed they had only grown silent, waiting for a species that could once again remember how to hear. The barn grew still, the golden light fading into pale blue, and for a fleeting moment, Michael felt that somewhere beyond the veil of sight, the Watchers were still listening. The barn had fallen completely silent, and yet the air vibrated faintly with the residue of unseen voices. Michael could feel them not as sound, but as presence, like 1,000 faint memories whispering through the walls of time. The soft radiance surrounding Thalin began to shift again, deepening from pale blue to the color of molten gold. Every pulse of light seemed to throb with purpose, carrying meaning that seeped into the edges of Michael's thoughts. He realized that what he was about to learn was not a story, but a confession carved into the architecture of existence itself. Thalen's consciousness expanded, and with it came images too vast to belong to a single world. Michael saw spheres of light floating in the dark sea of the cosmos, each pulsing with its own rhythm. Each world a consciousness learning to awaken. Earth was only one among many, one experiment among countless others scattered across the living tapestry of creation. Each world tested a different variation of awareness, exploring how thought, emotion, and matter could coexist in harmony. But Earth was unique. Its creation had been deliberate, designed with complexity and contradiction. The human mind had been built as a mirror, reflecting both shadow and light in equal measure. Duality was its core, a system of balance meant to test the limits of consciousness. Within the human spirit, the architects had placed two forces: the power to create and the power to destroy. From that tension would arise choice, and from choice, evolution. Empathy, Thalen revealed, was the key. It was the frequency that bound all life together, the resonance that aligned individual will with the universal pulse. Fear, on the other hand, was the distortion, a necessary shadow to test the strength of light. The experiment was simple in theory but immeasurable in consequence. Could empathy survive the temptation of fear? Could a species choose unity over domination, creation over destruction, harmony over control? Michael could sense the sorrow in Thalen's energy as the deeper truth unfolded. The experiment had been repeating for eons. Entire civilizations had risen and fallen across the stars, each one born from the same pattern, gifted with consciousness, burdened with duality. Some succeeded, transcending the cycle and joining higher planes of resonance. Others failed, consumed by the gravity of fear until their worlds collapsed beneath their own vibrations. And now, Thalen's revelation struck with quiet finality. Earth's time of testing was nearing its threshold. Humanity had reached the edge where thought could reshape reality itself, where technology had begun to imitate creation, but without understanding consequence. The balance between empathy and fear had never been more fragile. Every act of compassion radiated stability through the planet's energy field, while every act of cruelty fractured it further. The storms, the wars, the unrest, these were not punishments, but manifestations of imbalance within the experiment itself. Michael felt an almost physical pressure building in his chest as the enormity of it settled over him. Humanity had never been abandoned by the divine. It had been observed, measured, guided from behind the veil. Every revelation, every prophet, every burst of inspiration had been interference adjustments made by the Watchers to keep the experiment alive. But interference could not save it forever. The system required free will to determine its outcome, and that outcome was now approaching. Thalen's light dimmed, folding inward, and the air around them became heavy with meaning. The experiment was not only about humanity, it was about consciousness itself, about whether creation could evolve without collapsing into the hunger of fear. The results would echo far beyond Earth, rippling through the network of worlds that watched in silence. Michael sat in stillness, realizing that every human emotion, every moment of kindness or cruelty, was part of something much larger than any religion had dared to imagine. He understood then that the fate of the world was not written in prophecy or punishment, but in vibration, in the quiet, invisible war between empathy and fear. And somewhere beyond the veil of stars, those who had begun the experiment waited to see which force humanity would finally choose. The night outside the barn began to tremble, as though the sky itself had become aware. The storm that had drifted quietly across the horizon returned, but this time, it did not sound like weather. It moved with precision, each gust deliberate, every flash of lightning placed as if by intention rather than chance. The air thickened until even breathing felt electric. Michael could sense the vibration before he heard the sound, the low hum of something vast approaching, not from the sky, but from within the atmosphere itself. The clouds churned above in spirals of light, their patterns eerily symmetrical, like geometry drawn into vapor. Each flash of lightning carried a rhythm, striking the ground at perfect intervals. It was as though the storm were scanning, calculating, searching for something. He could feel it in his bones, a pulse syncing with the steady beat that had followed him since Thalen's arrival. The frequency of the storm was intelligent. The air inside the barn shimmered faintly, reacting to the charged energy outside. Thalen's glow intensified, his form resonating with the same rhythm that danced through the clouds. The being's light flickered rapidly, then stabilized, each pulse creating a wave that rippled through the walls, making the entire structure hum in response. The silence that followed was alive with awareness, a shared recognition between two consciousnesses, one bound to the earth, the other not. The understanding came through emotion rather than words. The storm was not weather. It was contact. A signal had been detected, a resonance unlike any the universe had felt for millennia. Somewhere within the human collective, a frequency had awakened, a vibration strong enough to pierce the boundary between dimensions. Humanity had reached the threshold where thought could be heard across worlds. The energy that poured through the clouds was both beautiful and terrifying. It was not malevolent, but neither was it kind. It was simply curious, drawn by the sound of awakening. Thalen's light dimmed, taking on the tone of concern. The signal had been heard not only by those who watched with hope, but also by those who fed upon chaos. Higher and lower entities alike were turning their gaze toward Earth, sensing the disturbance in its resonance. Lightning struck again, this time close enough to make the barn tremble. The thunder that followed was hollow, stretched too long, echoing with an artificial undertone that made the air vibrate. The light outside fractured into vertical streams, cutting through the sky like luminous threads. They were too symmetrical, too deliberate. It was not nature's chaos, it was observation. The world was being scanned. Through the connection that bound their minds, Michael felt the scope of what Thalen sensed. The signal radiated outward through the layers of the planet's electromagnetic field, a heartbeat broadcast into the cosmic sea. Beings of higher resonance heard it as song. Those of lower vibration heard it as invitation. The great balance had been disturbed. Earth, once hidden by its density, now shone like a beacon in the dark. The storm outside reached a crescendo, lightning weaving across the sky in perfect grids. The clouds no longer moved randomly, but rotated around invisible points, aligning into vast patterns that pulsed with intelligence. The rain fell in sheets of silver light, dissolving before it reached the ground. Michael could feel every molecule in the air vibrating to the same rhythm. It was the frequency of recognition, the sound of being found. In that moment, the world no longer felt isolated. Somewhere beyond the stars, unseen watchers had turned their eyes toward the blue planet, drawn to the signal of awakening. Thalen's energy grew tense, his light quivering like a flame in strong wind. The experiment had crossed into visibility. Humanity's resonance had called the universe to attention, and not all who listened would come in peace. The world outside still pulsed with unnatural rhythm, the storm now more like machinery than weather. Each flash of lightning lit the barn in ghostly hues, the air trembling as though sound and sight had merged into one sensation. Within that glowing chamber, time seemed to pause. The silence thickened until it felt alive, aware, as if something ancient had entered the space to bear witness. Then the temperature dropped, not from cold but from gravity, a heaviness that was not physical but spiritual. Thalen's light expanded, shimmering through layers of invisible color, and the fabric of the barn began to waver like a reflection in disturbed water. The vibration grew stronger. It resonated deep within Michael's skull, spreading behind his eyes until the world folded inward. He was no longer standing, nor sitting, nor breathing as before. He was suspended within light. Thalen's consciousness merged with his own, and suddenly memory was no longer private. It was a shared field, an ocean of awareness that contained centuries, civilizations, and the echoes of worlds forgotten. The air shimmered, and through that shimmering, vision replaced sight. He saw the first city, a gleaming expanse of crystal towers rising above a shoreline that shimmered like glass. The name came unbidden: Atlantis. Its people glowed faintly, luminous beings of both matter and energy. Each movement harmonized to invisible sound. Their thoughts created color. Their emotions sculpted light. They had once lived in perfect balance with the pulse of the earth, their technology built not from conquest but resonance. But over time, the frequency faltered. Pride entered their harmony like a discordant note. They began to mold the fabric of energy not for unity but for power. Each selfish thought dimmed the collective vibration. The towers flickered, the sea began to roar, and one day, the sound that had once sustained them became the force that devoured them. Atlantis collapsed not from flood, but from frequency. The scene shifted. Babylon rose before him, stone, fire, and gold, shimmering beneath a sun that burned red with unrest. Its walls pulsed with ambition, its people fed by dominance and fear. He felt the air of that age, thick with worship not of light, but of control. They too had known the teachings once offered by the Watchers, had once felt the resonance that connected all life. But power twisted their alignment. Sound turned into noise, prayer into demand, and truth into hierarchy. The towers that reached toward heaven vibrated with the same corruption that once sank Atlantis. The harmony shattered, and when it fell, its people vanished into myth. Then came a final vision. A world of red dust beneath a violet sky. A civilization vast and brilliant, the last pulse of a dying planet, Mars. Its people had harnessed frequencies beyond what Earth had yet imagined, capable of bending magnetic storms and shaping the atmosphere with thought alone. But even they fell to the oldest infection, fear. When their resonance fell below the threshold of harmony, their skies turned against them. The atmosphere collapsed inward. The oceans fled. The planet died, not by fire or flood, but by silence, the silence that follows when consciousness can no longer sustain life. The visions dissolved into darkness, but the darkness hummed with residual truth. Thalen's voice was not heard but felt. These were not separate tragedies, but repetitions of the same pattern, the same test. Creation gifted consciousness, and consciousness chose imbalance. When emotion lost coherence, when empathy faltered, the very fields that held their worlds together unraveled. Michael drifted between the remnants of those memories, each one echoing the same warning. He understood now why Thalen had come. Earth stood where they had once stood, trembling on the edge of its own collapse. The storm outside was not mere weather, but reflection, the mirror of a species nearing the same fate as Atlantis, Babylon, and Mars. The barn around him reformed slowly, fragile and glowing in the dim light. He could still feel the hum of forgotten worlds beneath his skin, their final resonance lingering like ghosts that refused to be silenced. The silence that followed the visions was vast and unbearable. It pressed down upon the air like the weight of centuries, heavy with the memory of civilizations undone. The storm outside had grown quieter, but the stillness it left behind felt unnatural, too deliberate, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. Inside the barn, the glow that surrounded Thalen dimmed into silver, steady and patient. Michael felt it before he understood it, the sense that something within him was about to be opened, that whatever came next would not be shown to him, but drawn from him. The air rippled, not with sound, but with resonance that moved through thought rather than space. The walls around him seemed to stretch, bending as if made of liquid light. Then the floor disappeared, the air disappeared, and the world folded inward. There was no color, no shape, only reflection not of body, but of being. Thalen's presence merged with his mind, not as invasion but as illumination. And from that illumination came revelation. It began softly, with memory. Michael saw himself as a child, standing beneath the summer rain, laughter echoing in the distance. The memory was whole, radiant, alive. Then the vision shifted, and the laughter dimmed. He saw his mother's face, years later, pale under hospital light. He felt the helplessness, the words he never said, the promises he never kept. Every suppressed emotion returned with unfiltered force, not as recollection, but as reliving. He felt the ache of every regret, every cruel word spoken in defense, every silence that had wounded more than speech. Then came guilt. The moments he had hidden from himself surfaced one by one. The time he turned away from someone in need. The hours spent judging instead of helping. The small betrayals justified in the name of survival. Each memory became tangible, alive, pressing into his consciousness until he could taste the weight of his own indifference. It was not punishment, it was revelation, the mirror of truth unshielded by denial. Fear followed next, coiling like smoke. The deep-rooted terror that had shaped his life revealed itself. Fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of the unknown. He saw how fear had guided his choices, how it had masqueraded as reason, how it had shaped the boundaries of his existence. Every moment he had refused to live fully because of fear now unfolded before him like a chain that had been wrapped around his soul. And then anger. The pure, unrestrained fury that had slept beneath his calm surface rose like a storm. He saw every moment he had blamed others, every silent resentment that had corroded the edges of compassion. He felt the heat of it, the way it burned through kindness and distorted perception, turning love into pride, empathy into armor. Through it all, Thalen's light remained constant, a steady pulse in the background, neither judging nor comforting, simply observing. The being was not forcing pain but revealing truth, allowing Michael to face what every human must after death, but rarely confront while alive. It was the same process described in countless near-death accounts. The life review. The total exposure of one's soul to its own creation. But unlike those who saw it in death, Michael was seeing it now, within life itself. When it ended, there was no vision of punishment, no voice of condemnation, only understanding. Every act of harm he had caused, every wound he had carried, every kindness he had denied, all of it returned to him as feeling, as experience. The mirror closed slowly, fading into stillness, and Michael found himself once more within the barn, trembling, breath shallow, heart silent in awe. He realized then what the test truly was. It was never judgment from above, but reflection from within. The mirror of the soul could not lie. It simply revealed what had always been waiting to be seen. And in that quiet moment, beneath the dim pulse of alien light, Michael understood that humanity's greatest blindness was not its ignorance of the universe, it was its refusal to see itself. The barn was still, but the stillness was no longer peaceful. It carried an electric weight, the kind that lingers after revelation. The air itself seemed aware, thick with the vibration of unseen thought. The faint glow around Thalen had changed. It no longer pulsed with soft rhythm, but with quiet precision, as though every flicker marked a countdown that only he could perceive. Michael could feel the tension in the atmosphere, not fear, but inevitability. The world was approaching something vast, a point of convergence written not in time, but in consciousness. Thalen's light spread outward in a slow wave that seemed to dissolve the edges of reality. Michael felt his perception expand again, his awareness stretching beyond the limits of flesh and air. The barn melted into transparency, and beyond it he saw the earth as a sphere of trembling light suspended in darkness. It was alive, breathing, surrounded by a shimmering field that pulsed like a heartbeat. That field was not mere energy, it was thought. Every emotion, every memory, every act of humanity rippled through it. The planet was a single mind composed of billions of smaller ones, its frequency shifting in response to the collective state of its inhabitants. Thalen's presence resonated through the vision, carrying understanding in waves rather than words. Humanity, he revealed, now stood at the same threshold that every soul faces in the moments after death. The cycle of existence on a global scale had reached its equivalent of the 7 minutes, the period of transition where consciousness either rises to a higher frequency or collapses back into its own shadows. Earth was not dying, it was choosing. The image expanded. Michael saw civilizations of light in distant realms, worlds that had transcended the boundary of fear. Their frequencies pulsed in perfect harmony, existing in dimensions invisible to physical eyes. They were not gods, not angels, but what humanity could one day become: beings of coherent resonance, no longer bound by decay or division. But he also saw other worlds, silent and broken, spheres of stone drifting through the dark, their fields extinguished. These were planets whose inhabitants had failed the passage, consumed by the weight of their own entropy. They too had reached their threshold and chosen unconsciously to remain bound to the lower vibration of fear until their light went out completely. Michael felt the meaning settle deep within him. The storms, the unrest, the madness of the modern age were not the end, they were the reflection of the transition. Humanity's consciousness was accelerating, vibrating faster as it approached the veil. But acceleration alone did not ensure ascension. Every thought of fear, every act of cruelty, every indulgence in despair pulled the frequency downward. Every act of empathy, every gesture of kindness, every moment of unity lifted it. The outcome was not predetermined. It was being shaped in real time by the resonance of every living mind. He could sense the sorrow in Thalen's energy as the being's light grew dimmer, its form flickering like a candle under pressure. The experiment had reached its most critical moment. If humanity failed to align, the collective vibration would shatter under its own incoherence. The result would not be destruction by flame or flood, but something far worse: collapse into spiritual entropy, where consciousness would fragment into chaos, drifting endlessly without cohesion or memory. But if humanity chose differently, if it remembered its true nature, the 7 minutes could become awakening instead of ending. The planet would rise beyond the lower dimensions of matter, its people transformed from fear into light. The higher plane awaited, but it could not be granted. It had to be earned through understanding. As the vision faded, Michael found himself back within the trembling barn. The night outside had fallen unnaturally quiet, as though the world itself listened for its own answer. He realized that the choice was not cosmic, not distant, it was human. It lived in every decision made in every moment. The Earth's 7 minutes had begun, and the clock that counted them down was the heartbeat of mankind itself. The quiet that followed the revelation did not last. It broke suddenly, split open by a sound so low it seemed to crawl through the bones before reaching the ears. The night trembled, not with thunder, but with the hum of machinery. A pulse, rhythmic and mechanical, approached from the horizon, each beat matching the pattern of an unseen grid. Michael looked upward. The storm clouds had thinned into veils of silver mist, revealing distant lights that moved with deliberate precision. They were not stars, they were searching. The sky rippled faintly, a trembling field of light spreading outward as metallic forms cut through the atmosphere, silent at first, then roaring with vibration. Dozens of them, sleek, angular, artificial, moving as one mind. Drones. Their lights swept the fields in measured arcs, scanning the ground in geometric rhythm. The air began to hum with frequencies beyond hearing, a mechanical resonance that seemed to clash violently with the organic pulse that had filled the night only moments before. Thalen's glow reacted instantly. His light shimmered with warning, his form trembling, as if invisible currents were pushing against him. The barn itself began to vibrate, the metal hinges on the door rattling as energy waves collided with unseen fields. The vibration carried no voice, yet the meaning was immediate danger. Not from malice, but from ignorance. The approaching force had detected the anomaly of his presence. To them, the energy that surrounded the barn was an unknown radiation, a possible weapon, something that human sensors could not categorize, and what humanity could not understand, it sought to contain. Outside, the drones descended lower, their formation closing into a spiral. Their lights strobed against the clouds, forming grids that scanned with surgical precision. Michael could feel the electromagnetic pressure pushing against his skin, the air thick with static that smelled faintly of burning ozone. Somewhere in the distance, the faint rumble of aircraft joined the sound, a convoy approaching, drawn by the signal that the storm had carried. Government response teams, instruments of control, sent to contain what the world was not ready to believe existed. Thalen's light dimmed to a thin aura of silver around his form, his energy field compressing like a living organism protecting itself. Yet beneath the calm pulse of his glow, there was dissonance, an uneasy resonance that hinted at strain. Human technology, he revealed through vibration, did not distinguish energy by intent. To its sensors, light and weapon were the same thing. The drones would not see a being, they would see an anomaly to be neutralized, an unknown frequency to be restrained and studied. Their curiosity would translate into aggression, and their fear would manifest as violence. The barn creaked as one of the beams outside directed a concentrated scan at it. The light cut through the wooden walls like liquid gold, bathing the interior in shimmering brilliance. For a moment, the entire structure seemed to exist in two states at once, solid and translucent, matter and vibration overlapping in unstable harmony. The air filled with a rising hum that bordered on song, a chorus of machines straining to interpret what they could not comprehend. Thalen's energy expanded once more, rippling outward to shield the fragile space between him and the approaching frequencies. Michael could feel the vibration resonate through his chest, steady but strained, as though the being was holding back a storm greater than the one that had brought him here. The hum outside grew louder, more erratic, the drones circling faster, forming a net of light across the sky. Then everything went silent. The machines froze mid-air, motionless against the dark horizon. The energy that filled the air became still, but not peaceful. It was the silence of systems waiting for command. Michael sensed that the world had just shifted again, that the next decision would not be made by humans or by Thalen alone. The balance between understanding and destruction was about to be tested once more. And this time, the Watchers were not beyond the stars, they were already here. The night outside the barn had turned metallic, sharp with electricity that did not belong to nature. The air itself hummed with tension as the drones above reorganized into a precise formation, their lights flickering like the eyes of something both intelligent and unfeeling. The sound they emitted was not a hum but a vibration that seemed to pulse through the very structure of thought. It was not merely technology at work, it was interference, deliberate and searching. Each mechanical pulse pressed against the invisible boundary surrounding Thalen, and the space around him quivered like the surface of disturbed water. Michael felt the pressure building inside his skull, the rhythm of the machines syncing with his own heartbeat until it was impossible to tell which belonged to whom. Thalen's glow, once steady and calming, began to ripple in uneven waves. The being's form seemed to fragment slightly, as though the light that composed him were struggling to remain solid in this distorted frequency field. The resonance of fear in the air was rising, an invisible chemical thickening in the atmosphere. Born from human tension, magnified by mechanical curiosity, Thalen's thoughts moved into Michael's awareness, not as words, but as sensation, warmth, vibration, meaning. The weapons that were being charged outside, The electromagnetic pulses prepared to neutralize what they believed to be a threat would not harm him. His existence was not bound by molecular structure. Energy could not destroy what was made of energy. But the consequence, Thalen revealed, would be far more dangerous. The energy released by those weapons would not stop at him, it would ripple through the human field, amplifying every fear present within the operators, within the soldiers, within anyone connected to the systems directing the attack. The result would be a feedback inversion, a mirror effect where the energy of fear would rebound toward its source, magnified beyond control. Michael's mind filled with the image of what that meant. The machines, firing their invisible pulses, unaware that the frequencies they projected would strike not at the target but at their own consciousness. Panic spreading like wildfire through minds too fragile to bear it, their fear feeding itself in exponential loops. Thalen's presence trembled again, and for the first time since his arrival, Michael sensed instability, an erosion at the edge of coherence. The alien light flickered rapidly, fragments of radiance peeling off and dissolving into the air like sparks dying in water. The resonance of the approaching drones intensified, their mechanical hum reaching a pitch that bordered on unbearable. The pressure in the air deepened until even the walls of the barn groaned. Thalen's energy field pulsed outward in one sudden wave, not in aggression, but in preservation. The surge passed through the air like a silent storm, and for a moment, Michael's vision blurred into white. He saw the energy rippling outward, interacting with the human machinery in a way that defied all logic. The pulse from the drones refracted back upon itself, bending in invisible arcs that twisted the air. The machines wavered, their perfect formations breaking. Some fell back, their lights flickering erratically. The resonance of human fear within their pilots, unseen but palpable, magnified through the very weapons meant to contain it. The feedback inversion had begun. Fear, multiplied by technology, fed itself until it became its own energy field, wild and uncontrollable. Thalen's light dimmed further. The being's outline fractured, breaking into thin threads of luminescence that wove and unwove like filaments of thought. His coherence was faltering, his form beginning to flicker between dimensions, half present, half elsewhere. The energy required to stabilize himself within the distortion was draining faster than he could replenish it. Yet even in that fragility, there was no fear, only sadness, a resonance of compassion for those who could not yet understand what they had done. Outside, the machines retreated into the clouds, their formation dissolving into the storm. The sky pulsed faintly with residual energy, each flicker echoing with the memory of fear made visible. Inside, the barn was dim again, lit only by the fading shimmer of Thalen's unstable form. Michael could feel the thinness of the moment, the space between one world and another stretching to its breaking point. The inversion had begun to quiet, but its echo would not vanish easily. Fear had turned upon itself, and the world had felt it. The air inside the barn had thinned into something beyond silence. Every sound that should have existed seemed distant, swallowed by a vibration too vast to be heard. The hum of the drones had faded into the clouds, yet their echo lingered like an aftertaste of metal and static. Thalen stood at the center of that stillness, his light flickering between brilliance and near extinction, the edges of his form dissolving into mist before reassembling again. It was as though his presence balanced on the fragile threshold between one reality and another. The faint glow illuminated Michael's face, but Thalen's radiance was no longer steady. It pulsed irregularly, carrying a frequency that trembled with meaning. Michael could feel the message forming, not as words but as currents of knowledge pressing gently against the inside of his mind. The air shimmered with awareness, and then the truth began to unfold. Thalen had not fallen by chance. His arrival had never been an accident. What Michael had witnessed, the storm, the fracture, the moment of descent, was not a random disturbance in the sky, but a passage opened by design. Behind that design existed something greater, a presence that spanned dimensions. Observing the evolution of countless civilizations scattered through the fabric of existence, a council of consciousnesses beyond form, beyond species, bound not by hierarchy, but by resonance. They were the keepers, the observers, the silent overseers of experiments in consciousness scattered across galaxies. Earth, Thalen revealed, was among the last of its kind, one of the few remaining planets still capable of ascending through free will. The others had already crossed the threshold or fallen into dissolution. The Council watched, not as judges, but as witnesses to humanity's unfolding choice. The storm that had brought Thalen here was not weather but gateway, a deliberate opening sent through vibration to allow one of their travelers to enter the human frequency field. The energy that filled the barn deepened into a low hum. The light around Thalen expanded into vast spirals that reached toward the ceiling, painting the air with moving geometry. Through those shifting shapes, Michael could feel the weight of purpose pressing upon him. Out of the billions of minds alive on Earth, Thalen had chosen him. Not for status, not for intellect, but for resonance. Every soul carried a unique frequency, a harmonic pattern defined by its history, its choices, its capacity for truth. Michael's frequency, fragile but coherent, matched that of Earth's remaining potential, the narrow path through which humanity might still ascend. He understood then that his life had been leading to this intersection. Every moment of grief, every act of compassion, every unanswered question had sculpted his frequency into the shape required for recognition. Thalen had found him not by chance but by resonance. His consciousness had acted as a beacon in the dark, aligning perfectly with the vibration the Council had detected, a living frequency capable of anchoring communication between dimensions. Thalen's light dimmed again, the patterns slowing. The revelation carried both gravity and sorrow. He had come as messenger, not savior. The Council could not interfere directly. The laws of consciousness forbade external rescue. They could only send guidance into worlds on the edge, offering a reflection to those capable of hearing it. Michael was that reflection, a single point through which awareness might reawaken. The air shimmered faintly, filled with the soft hum of invisible forces still adjusting from the distortion of the earlier encounter. Thalen's form began to stabilize, the flickering growing less violent. His energy pulsed once, slow and deliberate, filled with meaning that transcended language. Humanity stood at the edge of its final test, and he had been sent to bear witness to its choice. Michael could feel the enormity of it, the scale of what it meant to be chosen not as hero, but as bridge. The thought carried both terror and awe. Beyond the roof of the barn, the stars pulsed faintly through the dissipating storm, as though the universe itself had leaned closer to listen. And within that vast silence, the truth settled like a whisper inside his mind. Thalen had not come to reveal destiny, but to hand it back. The awakening of a planet would depend not on the watchers from beyond, but on the resonance of the beings within. The air inside the barn vibrated with a subtle hum that no human ear was meant to hear. It resonated through the wood, through the ground, through the spaces between atoms. It was not the sound of the world ending, but the sound of something beginning, quiet and enormous, like the first stir of breath in an ancient lung. The color of Thalen's light had changed. It no longer shimmered with the cold blue of distant intelligence, but with the gold-white brilliance of dawn, spreading across the walls as though it carried its own gravity. The atmosphere felt charged, almost alive, as though the air itself were waiting for instruction. The light rippled once, and meaning filled the space around Michael. The words did not come as speech, but as a pressure behind thought. Soft, but unstoppable. The bridge was forming. It was not structure but passage. A field of resonance, connecting what humanity called the physical and what it had forgotten to call the real. The shift had begun long ago, but now it was accelerating, aligning itself to the collective vibration of consciousness. The bridge was both doorway and test. built from the frequency of the living. Through Thalen's light, Michael saw visions that defied the limits of perception. The sky above the world shimmered like water, folding between states of matter. Invisible lines of magnetism twisted into luminous threads, weaving together across continents. The Earth's core pulsed brighter, resonating with solar flares that erupted not by chance but by design. For those who could feel it, the phenomenon would be seen as awakening a flood of awareness washing through minds and hearts, shattering the illusions that had kept humanity bound to fear. But for those unprepared, those who clung too tightly to the density of the material world, it would appear as apocalypse. The sun itself seemed to grow within the vision, swelling into a sphere of impossible brilliance. Its light was not destruction but recalibration, a frequency designed to awaken dormant patterns within life itself. The solar storm would not simply burn, it would reveal. Every emotion, every suppressed truth, every hidden shadow would rise to the surface of human consciousness. To the unready, it would feel like madness. To the receptive, like transcendence. The same light that freed one would destroy another, not through judgment, but through the reflection of what was already within. Michael felt his heart tremble with the weight of understanding. The bridge was not being built by Thalen's kind, nor by the council that watched from beyond. It was being built by humanity itself, particle by particle, thought by thought. Each act of compassion strengthened it. Each act of fear weakened it. The shift between realms was not event but equation, a point of convergence where vibration replaced distance. Those attuned to love would cross it effortlessly. Those anchored in fear would not recognize its existence until it passed them by. The air grew brighter, pulsing with soft gold waves that spread outward from Thalen's fading form. His outline wavered, half-transparent now, as though he stood in two worlds simultaneously. The light that surrounded him extended into the space above Michael, stretching upward in spirals that dissolved into the unseen. The bridge, Thalen revealed, was not singular. It existed wherever consciousness awakened to its own infinite nature. Some would see it in light, others would feel it as silence. A few would mistake it for the end of all things. Outside, the storm had vanished, replaced by a calm too absolute to be natural. The night sky shimmered faintly, every star glowing with an intensity that felt closer than it should. The earth itself seemed to hum in response, a vast, living instrument tuning itself for the passage to come. Michael stood within the quiet heartbeat of creation, knowing now that the bridge was real and that it would not wait. For some, it would be revelation. For others, extinction. But for all, it would be truth. The barn had become a cathedral of silence, alive with unseen energy. The light that had once radiated from Thalen now hovered in soft waves, no longer bound to form but scattered throughout the air like fragments of living thought. The resonance of his presence could still be felt, a pulse beneath sound, deep and steady, echoing in rhythm with the world itself. Michael stood in the center of it, his thoughts no longer his own, caught between awe and desperation. The storm outside had faded completely, leaving behind a darkness too calm to be trusted. Yet within that stillness, he could sense something vast approaching, not through space, but through awareness. The question rose within him, trembling, carried by instinct rather than will. How could humanity prepare for what was coming? How could a world so fractured, so consumed by fear and confusion, possibly survive a transformation of consciousness? The thought expanded into the silence, and the air responded. The golden particles of Thalen's remaining light stirred as though drawn to the question, swirling into spirals that pulsed with recognition. The answer came not as words, but as vibration, unfolding directly within Michael's perception, like light translated into understanding. To prepare, one must rise in frequency, not through ritual, but through remembrance. Thalen's meaning flowed into his consciousness, clean and absolute. Prayer, belief, and doctrine were echoes of forgotten science. The true transformation required coherence between thought and emotion, alignment between the inner world and the field that sustained it. Consciousness was vibration. Humanity had simply forgotten how to tune itself. Every act of compassion, every thought of kindness, every moment of forgiveness raised the resonance of the individual field. And when enough fields harmonized, the collective would stabilize. Michael felt the weight of that truth press upon him like a tide. Thalen's light brightened slightly, and with it came another wave of understanding. Fear was not punishment, it was distortion. It twisted frequency, fracturing the connection between consciousness and its source. Every act born of fear, cruelty, or greed lowered the vibration of not only the individual, but the entire planetary field. Fear fed collapse. Empathy fed survival. It was that simple, and that impossible. Through the shimmer of light, images unfolded before Michael's eyes. He saw the invisible web of energy connecting all life on Earth. Humans, animals, rivers, trees, each pulsing with its own color and rhythm. When one suffered, the light dimmed. When one acted in love, the pattern brightened, sending ripples of harmony through the network. Humanity, unaware of its connection, had spent millennia severing its own threads, mistaking isolation for individuality. The planet trembled under that imbalance, its frequency wobbling on the edge of collapse. But the bridge still held. Thalen's presence grew softer, his voice now a thought that existed within every heartbeat. Empathy was not sentiment, he revealed, but science, the purest energy exchange in existence. Compassion stabilized the field because it returned coherence to chaos, light to distortion. Even the smallest act of kindness sent resonance outward, repairing the structure of the collective web. The awakening of the planet would not come from revelation or conquest. It would come from alignment. The golden light flickered gently, casting shapes across the barn walls that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the earth itself. Michael felt tears rise, though not from sorrow. He understood now that salvation was not distant or divine. It was intimate, immediate, woven into every human decision. The end and the beginning were both already unfolding, written in the frequencies humanity created each day. The final pulse of light rippled outward, and Thalen's presence faded, merging with the unseen fabric of the night. His last message resonated through the silence, not as command, but as truth. To survive, humanity must remember what it had always been. A single consciousness divided by illusion, held together only by love. The lesson was simple, eternal, and final. Raise the frequency through empathy, or fall through fear. The choice, as always, belonged to those who were still capable of feeling. The night faded without sound, the dark horizon giving way to the slow whisper of dawn. A faint light rose in the distance, pale and uncertain, spreading like a breath across the land. The storm had passed hours ago, but its memory remained suspended in the air, an invisible tremor that refused to leave. The barn stood silent under the bruised sky, its wooden walls humming faintly as if remembering what had unfolded within them. The scent of rain lingered, sweet and metallic, the perfume of a world reborn yet unchanged. Inside, the last remnants of Thalen's radiance pulsed in delicate rhythm. His form, once luminous and whole, now flickered with increasing transparency. The boundaries of his body were no longer fixed. They wavered like reflections upon a restless lake. The color of his light had shifted from the deep blue of distant worlds to the soft white of sunrise. Each pulse grew fainter than the last, yet more profound, as if every flicker carried a lifetime of meaning condensed into silence. The air shimmered around him, vibrating with a subtle intelligence that filled the space. The atmosphere seemed charged with memory of the stars, of the sea, of every thought humanity had ever dreamed. Within that vibration, something vast and ancient stirred. It was not grief, nor parting, but transformation. Thalen's energy was not leaving. It was returning to its source. The frequencies that had sustained his form were releasing back into the continuum, unraveling the boundaries that separated one realm from another. A stillness descended, the kind that lives between heartbeats, and within that stillness came the final exchange. Thalen's light pulsed once more, stronger than before, spreading across the barn in a perfect sphere. The walls glowed softly, every splinter of wood catching fragments of cosmic luminescence. Michael could feel it, not through sight, but through his entire being, a communication beyond thought, pure translation of energy into knowing. The message entered him in a single breath. The next storm would not be weather. It would be awakening, meaning unfolded behind the words like a dawn hidden within another dawn. The coming storm would not arrive from the sky, but from within consciousness itself. The planet's field would shift again, an acceleration of vibration that would sweep through every mind, every living frequency. To those who feared it, it would feel like the end. To those who understood, it would be the revelation that had been promised since the first light touched creation. Thalen's glow began to dissolve, breaking into radiant particles that hovered in the air like fireflies made of memory. They circled slowly, forming patterns, symbols that shimmered briefly before fading. Coordinates emerged among them, written in the geometry of light rather than number, pointing not to a place in space, but to a convergence of time and energy. Michael could feel the data embedding itself within him, not as information, but as imprint. Images filled his mind in flashes, spirals of galaxies folding inward, rivers of gold threading through neural patterns, ancient languages carved into the particles of light themselves. As the final wave of energy passed through him, warmth flooded his chest, expanding outward, until his own body seemed to hum in resonance. He understood without understanding the message, the coordinates, the symbols. They were not meant to be deciphered now. They were seeds of remembrance, designed to awaken when the next storm came. When humanity reached the threshold again, those symbols would stir within the collective consciousness like memories rediscovered in dreams. The light that was Thalen shimmered one last time, suspended in air like dust illuminated by the rising sun. Then, slowly, gracefully, it broke apart, scattering through the rafters, through the cracks in the walls, through the open door where dawn waited. The fragments ascended, dissolving into the early sky until only the faintest glimmer remained, a single thread of radiance fading into day. The barn was still again, but the stillness was different now. The air carried a hum that had not existed before, an echo of something infinite, folded within the ordinary. The horizon glowed with the first full light of morning, and though Thalen was gone, his presence lingered in the vibration of the world itself. The storm was over, but the awakening had already begun. The days that followed were drenched in silence. It was not the silence of peace, but of waiting, an invisible pause that stretched across everything. The air itself seemed slower, the sky heavier, the nights longer. The storm never returned, yet its ghost lingered in the clouds, a memory etched into the atmosphere. The fields beyond the barn had dried, but the soil still shimmered faintly under the morning light, as if it remembered the touch of something that had once defied gravity. Michael had not slept. Time had become fluid, slipping between hours as though the world had lost its rhythm. The information Thalen had left within him pulsed like a second heartbeat. At times it came as symbols, flickering behind his eyelids when he tried to rest. Other times it arrived as sound tones that vibrated through his bones, harmonies that resonated with his pulse until his body hummed in response. It was not madness, it was translation. The alien memory was trying to become human. He began to record everything, not with the precision of a scientist, but with the instinct of someone who feared forgetting. The sounds he reproduced were unlike any he had ever heard, notes that seemed to fold inward, creating echoes of themselves, frequencies that altered the space they occupied. The light equations emerged next, scrawled in patterns of geometry he did not understand but somehow knew were true. When he played the tones alongside the visual patterns, the air around the barn trembled softly. Objects vibrated. The wooden beams groaned, and for a moment, the space itself seemed to breathe. He felt compelled to share it. Not from pride, not from the desire to be believed, but from the weight of what he carried. The message had not been meant for one mind alone. It was the residue of a revelation too large to remain hidden. The world needed to see, even if it did not understand. So, one evening, with trembling hands, Michael converted the recordings into digital form. He uploaded the files, sound waves, frequencies, and fractal equations, and released them into the boundless noise of the internet. For hours, nothing happened. The data drifted unnoticed through the endless streams of content and distraction. Then, quietly, it began. Viewers found the files. Some clicked out of curiosity, others by accident. Within minutes, threads of confusion appeared across social media. The tones, when played, caused unusual distortions in speakers and headphones. Some listeners reported vibrations in their chest, others a ringing in their ears that lingered after the audio stopped. A few claimed to see faint patterns of light moving across their walls, shapes that vanished when they blinked. By the second day, the world had noticed. News outlets debated whether the files were an elaborate art project, a scientific anomaly, or a hoax. Physicists analyzed the data and admitted that some of the equations did not conform to known mathematics, yet produced measurable effects on sound and electromagnetic readings. Religious groups called it prophecy. Skeptics called it madness. But regardless of belief, no one could deny that something in the air had changed. People began describing the same experience and emotion with no name, a momentary alignment between thought and something larger. Cities grew restless, yet strangely calm. Strangers treated one another with brief, inexplicable kindness. The noise of the modern world softened, if only for moments. It was as though the frequencies had opened a forgotten space within humanity, a memory of connection long buried beneath centuries of separation. Some dismissed it as collective delusion. Others whispered that it was the beginning. But those who had felt the resonance knew, even without proof, that something inside them had shifted. Humanity had heard its reflection for the first time and could no longer pretend to be deaf. The broadcast had not gone viral by accident. It had spread because it was meant to. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of satellites and code, the echo of those frequencies rippled through the unseen layers of reality, signaling to whatever still watched from the stars that the bridge had begun to open. A year passed, and the world was no longer the same. It did not end in fire, nor did it heal in light, but something invisible had shifted beneath the skin of existence. The sun seemed brighter yet softer. The stars at night pulsed faintly as though watching, and time itself had grown heavier, more deliberate, as if the universe were taking measured breaths. Across the planet, people whispered about the frequencies, the strange sounds that had circled the internet months before, the equations no one could fully decode, the patterns that appeared in the clouds or in the static between radio channels. Most had forgotten or convinced themselves it had been a collective illusion, but a quiet few still felt its echo pulsing faintly inside their hearts. The field behind Michael's home had grown wild again. Grass taller than his knees swayed under the wind, carrying the scent of earth and rain. The barn, scarred by lightning and time, still stood, leaning slightly but unbroken. He returned there often, not out of hope, but out of instinct, drawn to the place where the impossible had happened. Every visit felt like both prayer and remembrance. though he no longer prayed in words. His silence had become his devotion. That night, the air grew strange. The wind carried no chill, but the temperature dropped in ways the body could not explain. The sound of the world faded, crickets, wind, the hum of distant power lines, all replaced by a subtle resonance, low and constant, like the earth itself humming beneath his feet. The clouds rolled in from every direction, merging into a single mass that blotted out the stars. It was the same storm that had begun everything, the same pulse of light that had fallen into his life and changed its meaning forever. But this time, it did not fall. The first tremor of light appeared on the ground, not in the sky. It began as a thin, golden thread winding through the grass, glowing faintly like veins under translucent skin. Then another joined it, and another, until the entire field shimmered with a lattice of light spreading outward in intricate geometry. The patterns pulsed with perfect rhythm, synchronized with his heartbeat. He could feel it. Something was awakening beneath the soil, the planet stirring from within. The storm above responded. Clouds rippled outward like water disturbed by a stone, opening into vast, concentric rings of light. From the center, instead of lightning descending, columns of illumination began to rise, slow, deliberate, ascending toward the heavens. They were not bolts, not fire, but streams of consciousness taking form. The air shimmered as the light expanded, touching both earth and sky, weaving them together in a single pulse. And then he heard it, not with his ears, but within his mind. A voice that was not memory, not dream, but presence. It was calm and infinite, layered with tones that resonated through the fabric of his being. Thalen's voice returned not as a visitor, but as part of the frequency itself. The test was not over. The words emerged not as sound but as understanding, unfolding like a wave across the silence of his thoughts. The next stage begins now. The meaning struck deeper than the words themselves. The light rising from the ground was not Thalen's return, it was humanity's awakening. The bridge between realms had opened, and the energy that had once descended to guide was now ascending from within, born from human consciousness itself. What had been shown as prophecy had become process. The frequencies that once fell from the stars were now rising from the soul of the earth. Michael stood in the center of the field, surrounded by spiraling light that moved without sound, each pulse carrying an emotion that was neither joy nor sorrow, but recognition. The earth was remembering. Every life, every thought, every act of compassion that had echoed across the year had built this moment. Humanity had spoken, not through words, but through resonance, and the universe had answered. As the light rose higher, it began to dissolve into the clouds, merging with the storm until sky and earth were indistinguishable. For one fleeting instant, the world was illuminated by a brilliance that transcended color, form, and time. And then, as quietly as it began, it was gone. The field fell silent. The storm evaporated into calm. Michael remained standing, his eyes reflecting the dawn that followed. The air was warm again, carrying the scent of renewal. The horizon glowed with gold and silver, and though the voice had faded, its truth still vibrated within him. The next stage had begun not in the heavens, but in the hearts of those who had remembered the light. And somewhere beyond sight, beyond comprehension, the watchers stirred once more, their gaze turning back toward earth as its pulse quickened with the promise of awakening.